thing in my ear. Alrighty. So a hard issue in discipleship in this new family of Jesus is learning how to resolve conflict maturely. And many people want to start with this skill, fight cleanly. They want relief from, the relational pain and tensions that they're living in. And they want it, they want that relief as quickly as possible. And for this reason, it's important for us to give you a realistic expectation around this skill. For one thing, we all need to understand that conflict happens on a spectrum, from who takes out the garbage to a church split. And in this session, we want us to think of this as a beginner conflict resolution tool. So we're not trying to deal with large, long-standing conflicts. And what's also important is to realize that fighting cleanly builds on the previous 7 skills that we've worked on in this course. So let me ask you, how good are you at the other skills? Have you been practicing them, getting comfortable with them in order to be good at conflict resolution? And so we have to practice this, and we have to be good at knowing what's going on inside of us so that we can speak back respectfully, honestly, clearly, and in a timely fashion. We need to be aware of any assumptions we may make or invalid expectations. We have to be really good at listening and be able to enter another person's world and listen incarnationally. We have to be able to get at our values. And like we talked about in the last session, in the ladder of integrity, the purpose of this skill is to resolve conflict as emotionally mature adults by eliminating dirty fighting and taking responsibility for a difficult issue. We each come from families of origin where we learned how to do conflict in certain ways. So perhaps, your mom was a screamer and a yeller. Your father was an appeaser who said very little until he would reach a point and he would just explode in anger. Maybe you saw relationships in your family get ruptured or broken but never repaired. How many of us had caretakers or parents that modeled for us and taught us how to deal with conflict maturely? So in our experience, very few of us had that in church. We misinterpret Jesus' words in Matthew 5 where he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." We think peacemakers is avoiding conflict at all costs, so nobody gets upset. And we mistakenly think that we're, just to be nice. We don't want to rock the boat, so we say nothing, and we end up in what can be called a false peace. Everything looks nice and good above the surface, but actually there's this tension, this resentment, and this anger beneath the surface. Jesus models for us true peacemaking. He didn't ignore tensions, and he didn't ignore differences. In fact, if you look closely, conflict was part of his life and ministry. He overturned the tables in the temple. He had difficult conversations with the religious leaders. He confronted the 12 disciples multiple times. He even, said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." He disrupted false peace in order to bring true peace. And in doing that, he shows us the true kingdom peace that we want and that we're longing for. And it's not pretending that there is no tension, that there's no issues that we have with each other. But true peacemakers love God and others enough to disrupt false peace. So for this reason, learning to fight cleanly is a core discipleship issue for all of us. It's important that we begin by looking at ways that we do dirty fighting. And we all have examples from our own lives of what it looks like for dirty fighting. But I want us to turn in our worksheet on page 51. And in the individual activity, just take a couple of minutes and circle the dirty fighting tactics that have applied to you in your history. Not answering for someone else, but how you dealt with things or how you fought. Alrighty, so let's move on. Sadly, the way people resolve conflicts in the church, it's not very different from conflict resolution outside the church. So it's possible to be a Christian for 10, 30, 40 years and still do conflict the way we did when we were 12 years old in our family growing up. If you did the genogram of your family and you looked only about how conflict was dealt with, for many of us, we would probably see negative patterns of emotionally immature ways of doing conflict that goes back generations. So this is a significant skill that we need to learn in fighting cleanly. A clean fight, in reality, it's not a fight at all. It's more of a negotiation between two people for the sake of the relationship. The person who's asking for the clean fight recognizes that it's their issue, and they care enough to take responsibility for something important to them, rather than projecting blame on the other person. The person listening to the issue cares enough to consider what is important to someone that they care about, and they're willing to negotiate. So now I want to show you a model of fighting cleanly. It's really forced. It's detached from any of us here, though. And the context is Jessica and her mom. Jessica has just returned home after living away for the last 4 years at a university. She's 22 years old, and she's experiencing tension with her mother around what she thinks is unsolicited advice. So if you're on page 52, you can follow along with the sort of the 8 steps in that skill as Jessica interacts with her mom. And yeah, it's awkward, but that's okay when you're learning a skill. So have a look.
Mom, are you willing to do a clean fight with me?
Of course, Jessica.
So I've noticed that ever since I've come home from college, you've been regularly giving me advice when I'm leaving the house. Like, make sure you come home early, you have work tomorrow, or make sure you park in a safe and lit area of a parking lot, or even letting me know to grab a jacket because it's cold outside.
Wow, so you've noticed that ever since you came home from college that I've been giving you all kinds of advice that you haven't asked for.
Mm-hmm. This is important to me because I value our relationship and I want to be honest with you. I want to be honest rather than going upstairs to my room or being frustrated and leaving the house.
So this is really, really important to you because you value our relationship together, and you'd rather address this now instead of avoiding it.
Yeah. I really value having that adult-to-adult relationship rather than having an adult-to-child relationship.
So you feel that it's important to you to have an adult-to-adult relationship with me rather than an adult-to-child.
Yeah. When you give me advice that I don't ask for, it annoys me. But I know that I'm only annoyed because I'm hurt.
So when I give you advice that you didn't ask for, you're really hurt.
Yeah. And, I'm only hurt because I feel like I'm a young, responsible lady who has graduated college, lived on her own for 4 years, and went straight into a full-time job. I think I'm pretty trustworthy.
So you really have proven yourself to be trustworthy by being in college and coming home and having a full-time job.
And, I've also realized that I'm disappointed in the way I react when you do give me this advice by acting like a child.
So sometimes you feel disappointed at how you react to what I tell you, and you feel that it's kind of childish.
Yeah. But I love you and Dad, and I really appreciate you both. I fear that if we don't talk about you giving me advice when I don't ask for it, I won't want to be home, and I'll either stay upstairs or stay out later.
You really value being at home with your dad and I. But the situation, if it doesn't change, sometimes you feel like you don't even want to be here.
So here's my request. I would like to ask that you not give me advice while I'm leaving the house, or even if I don't ask for it. And when you do have advice to give me, I would also like to ask that we set up a time so that we could sit down and talk about those concerns.
So your request is that I not give you advice when you're running out of the house, or not give you advice when you don't ask for it at all. And if I do have advice to share with you, that we set up a mutual time where we can sit down together and talk about it.
So what do you think about that?
Wow, Jessica, I had no idea that this was hurting you so much. I grew up in a really rough neighborhood in the city, and I saw a lot of dangerous things. And I think part of that is why I want to protect you from that now. It's part of my motherly instinct for the past 23 years.
So about my request, are you willing to do half, whole, or none?
Yeah, I'm willing to do all of it, but I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna slip. And when that happens, I'm gonna ask if you could give me a gentle reminder to put me back on track, especially when you feel that I've crossed over your adult boundaries.
Okay. So if you do slip and you give me advice, I can signal you with a word. And I'll signal you with the words comprende or gotcha to let you know that you've crossed the boundary.
I think that'll work.
Yeah. So let's sit down and write an agreement to review on June 15th.
All right, so why don't we do that June 15th, right after dinner?
Perfect. Thanks.
So there you have it. The awkward and seemingly forced. I think it was actually, they were actually working through that issue themselves. That would be really hard for a mother who's used to giving advice, but it was a good, healthy interaction where you could tell that they were actually for each other. So on page 52, just we'll work down quickly. Number one, state the problem. I notice. So whatever the issue is, state why it's important to you. I value. Fill in the following sentence. When you do whatever, I feel. State clearly, respectfully, and specifically your request. And specifically means to include details such as time and dates. And then as the listener, we need to consider the request, briefly share our perspective on it, like you heard Jessica's mom do. And are you willing to do all of it, part of it, or none of it? And there's sort of a negotiation that happens at that point. And then as the speaker, agree on, request, or offer an alternative. And you go back no more than 3 times, because if you can't come to a resolution, then it's probably a bigger issue, and you might need to seek out counsel or a mentor or someone to sort of mediate between the two of you. Then together, write out your agreement and plan to review it in a few weeks. And the speaker says, my understanding of the agreement is this, and the listener says, my understanding of the agreement is. And then review the agreement in 2 to 4 weeks.